All right. Well, it's roughly 11:01 here. We can go ahead and get started. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, depending on where you are. Welcome to the webinar. My name is Justin Conroy. I'm one of the general managers here at Radix over the North American manufacturing business. And today we're going to be talking about PI system governance, and it's important for data-driven enterprises. A couple of quick introductions. You see everybody on camera. I've already introduced myself. We have Elliott Bell, also with Radix. He's our Pulp and Paper Program Director. We have Mark Roos, who also is with Radix. He's our Oil and Gas Program Director. And we have Laurei Diffenrich from AVEVA, so graciously joined us. Thank you, Laurei. She's a Customer Success Manager. This is a really, really great group of people. I think combined, there's quite a lot of experience here. So excited to see how these conversations go today. Before we get into the discussion, which is actually going to be the heart of this webinar today, I did want to talk a little bit about Radix and give you a little bit of a background. So when it comes to PI system enterprise governance, we actually see this as just one piece of a greater ecosystem that we have coined as the digitally integrated asset. And we've been working with digitally integrated assets for quite a long time. I won't read every bubble on this chart for you, but just kind of give you the idea. On the bottom, you can see the history of partnerships that we've had throughout the last 6 or 7 years or so. And on the top, you can see the projects that we've actually worked on with various customers that are focused on creating digital twins and having digitally integrated assets. Okay, so we started back in 2015 with Exxon, and last year we had our first digital twin project, a full implementation in Brazil, and our first digital twin in Latin America was actually this year. So we've been doing this for a long time. So I mentioned that governance is just one piece of the puzzle. And this is really the ecosystem puzzle that we talk about, the principles of a digitally integrated asset. So there's the governance and leadership part on the top left. But in order to really think about a true digitally integrated asset, a true digital twin, you need to make sure to focus on the other aspects of what makes that asset an asset. Okay, so you have to keep in mind the business impacts and the data that you're tracking and what ROIs it's actually delivering. You've got to worry about your digital enablement so that you can make sure that data can become available for everyone who needs it. You need to worry about your risk management as far as EHS, cybersecurity, financial security, IT security. You need to worry about your physical infrastructure to make sure that the hardware that you're using can actually keep up with the processing that you want to output. And you, of course, need to worry about the people and processes that are using these systems and consuming the data and turning that data into money. So again, governance is really just one piece of the digitally integrated asset. And so with that, I'm going to pass it over to Elliott, and he'll start talking about how governance affects all this. Elliott.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome, or everyone, I guess, on the East Coast and otherwise. Good morning to everyone else. When you think about governance, a lot of people think that they understand governance, but in short, my definition is governance is implied discipline, right? If you think about why you would want implied discipline, it's really about, especially in this space, when you think about an enterprise level solution, that enterprise level solution is not for one person or for 10 people. It's usually for hundreds or thousands of users. And when most corporations go to an enterprise level solution, what they're really trying to do is to involve or integrate a higher number of their employees in the use of that asset, or in this case, in the use of data. So how do you keep all of those different ideas, all of those different minds working in a single direction? It is by establishing discipline. So then you have to think about, so where are the points and places that you need discipline? Of course, your standards around tag naming, tag mapping, training plans. Those are your standards. Then you have your data operation points. As Justin talked about, your HMIs, your reports that you want to share throughout the enterprise, and even your solutions, your architecture, the health and support of the system. And this is one of the ones that is probably omitted the most, is if you have a enterprise level solution, you really have to respect or work hard to keep it at a certain health level to ensure that you can subtract value or get value out of the system. Quite often, because we come from a point of a lot of individual kingdoms, that's missed. And then, of course, in today's world, security is paramount no matter what else is going on. So when we speak to governance, we're really speaking to the applied discipline of your standards, of your data operations, of your architecture, of your health and support, and your security across your enterprise, enabling your hundreds to thousands of employees to extract the greatest amount of value out of the system. Now, Mark is going to kind of lead us in discussion of how we do that.
Yeah, thank you. So I guess to get going here, right, the slide's got a lot of content in it. And the way I like to take a look at this is, as Elliott's kind of already presented, we've got this great model that we can design with a customer, but now we got to put it in place, and that can get overwhelming sometimes. And that's where I think what we're seeing here as far as a roadmap go fits right in, because we start breaking it into some of those elements you got to have to make a successful system. And that gets into understanding resources, having the right procedures in place, but more importantly, the strategic aspect of your governance model. And that's really, business aligning with IT, of understanding what do you want to do. So, we can see that elements in here in this slide. And then across the top, we kind of see the level 3, level 4, level 5s. Those kind of go into the maturity of the business with the system. And that's the one thing that I think as well, what you'll see in here is there's kind of 3 different tracks that lead you up to level 3, level 4, level 5. And that's really where we come in to help define a path that you don't get overwhelmed. We all like to think and be out there in those kind of level 5 pieces, but you got to get going first, right? And that first piece is just getting your teams in place, getting your procedures in place, and getting your system up and running for users, that the system has support, right? The users have support, and it's functioning healthy, right? So that's your first kind of iterative approach, and from there, then that's, again, comes back to what is your strategy? Is your strategy to start bringing this across multiple facilities? And if that's the case, right, you really start lining up to that level 4. And again, it kicks back to resources, because now you're going to have this deployed in multiple places. You got to be able to kind of test it, make sure it's healthy, make sure that you can actually roll it out. And that's exactly what that kind of middle track is. Make sure you got development environments in place. Hey, we've got new things going on. We're going to have to put in some more procedures, right? So increasing your governance model. And then for that real good kind of growth, putting some standards in place, right? If you're going to manage this, then you've got to start leveraging templates, start defining KPIs. What do you want to see in that? And that all comes from that strategy phase. And then again, now the last part, right? You really got a good system. You got governance in place. You're starting to scale it across your organization. The fun stuff comes, right? How do we optimize it, right? How do we start integrating with other systems and really driving optimizations? Really, how do you use that data and transform how you operate as a company? And again, it's work. And that first piece comes back into is making sure you have the right people that can actually support some of those developments. Make sure you got procedures in place. Make sure you got procedures on how to roll in these new changes, monitor them, etc. But that's where it leads you up into that level 5 piece. And yeah, that's a real fun time in a company. But the key takeaway here, guys, is that it can feel overwhelming, but there are ways to break it and be iterative at it. And when you start thinking about it like that, it's definitely very manageable and can be executed successfully. So, that's kind of what I had to say here on that. I'll kick it back over to Justin.
Cool. Thanks, Mark. And, before we get into the actual panel discussion, I'm listening to you and Elliott. Just wanted to ask, could maybe each of you just touch on a little bit of, tell us about when an implementation went poorly. Start with Mark.
You had to hit me there, but you know what? It's good, right? Lessons learned always make us improve. And I'll tell you, right? We were working on with a customer. We developed this beautiful model, right? We were socializing it, etc. And we took a little pause. And a few months later, the customer comes back, says, "Hey, yeah, we want to implement it." All right, so we start putting a plan in place of how we're going to get the team in place, how we're going to get the system kind of set up, make this beautiful, roadmap and project plan. And again, first thing that kind of comes in, we start talking resources. Okay, people, we're going to need some infrastructure. What we found out was, yes, there was some socialization going on, but we were lacking that one piece on the resource side of, yes, we understood there'd be some support from the IT folks, but they really hadn't onboarded the right amount of staffing to support it. End of the day, we had to reschedule the project some, right? And we ended up achieving and delivering, but it's those kind of little hiccups, those little details of when you actually go to implement is when you start having those conversations. It's really getting in that mind of, hey, we're not just talking now. We're actually going to do something, right? Are you ready?
Elliott, do you have anything you want to contribute?
Yeah, I'm on mute. So I won't say it didn't go well. Let's just say that we didn't reach the full value creation that we could have. And what we've seen quite often is the research to justify enterprise level agreement or enterprise level move into PI comes with high expectations. One of the things that's happened quite often is either, unfortunately in my history, either we did not have the proper C-suite level support or high executive level support, or because the project was so large or came with such expectations, everyone individually at mill levels sought to create their own solutions instead of having a truly integrated path forward. And so what happens is when you have such disorientated effort, or where you don't have a strong alignment, instead of getting true value quickly, it takes a longer time for value to start showing up at all, especially showing up at a level that actually impacts the bottom line on an enterprise type level.
Awesome. Guys, thank you. I appreciate that. So at this point, we have about 45 minutes left in the session. I'm going to hand this over to Laurei, who's graciously offered to moderate our panel discussion. And then I didn't mention this before, but audience, if you have any questions, feel free to type them in chat. And we're going to have a Q&A section at the end, so we'll definitely address those. Laurei?
Awesome. Thank you so much, Justin. And thanks everybody that's joined in here today. I hope that you're able to take away some of the knowledge that our Radix resources here have. And I just want to add that I've worked with a number of large customers, some of whom have had the PI system for a long time, and some of whom were new to the PI system. So that sort of covers the Greenfield versus Brownfield scenario, if you will. So I wanted to ask Mark and Elliott, some more difficult questions that our audience might be interested in. So I'm going to just throw this one based on something that Elliott said in his original discussion there, right? And so you were talking about working in a single direction, and I think you already just commented on this, Elliott, about there is some risk, right, that people will continue to do their own thing because that's what we've always done, and we are an island. What are some strategies that you've used to overcome that kind of thinking? Because I believe that you've been successful at that.
Thank you, Laurei. That's a great question. So the biggest start when you're looking at it from an enterprise level, if you're looking at it at a mill level, one person doing a project is great. But from an enterprise level, you have to have an aligned case for change, right? So if you get an aligned case for change, through that evaluation, you will identify the multiple areas where there are gaps to productivity, there are gaps to cost, there may be just a gap to efficiency in how you do business or in creating that alignment throughout the multiple individuals. And so once that case for change is aligned, you can have a strategy or even multiple strategies that allow you to still work towards that greater case for change and correct those gaps. And so usually with large industrial customers, you don't have a single point. You have, unfortunately, hundreds and even thousands of small places to improve. But once you start looking at those individual small places, they start to roll up into much larger numbers. So the bigger thing is governance starts not after the system is in, especially if you want to have a fast-paced improvement. The governance starts in the conception of the project, which starts with the definition of your case for change.
Thank you so much, Elliott. That's a very nice description of how you get people aligned and moving in the same direction. I appreciate that. So my next question is sort of targeted at Mark, and I don't mind if Elliott also jumps in, but I want to share the love here. So this is sort of for you, Mark. When we talk about it's important for the governance process to have certain procedures in place, and what I've seen to be a struggle at times is what's the scope of those procedures, right? I mean, there might be some procedures that don't need to be so strictly standardized. Is there a way to sort of tease out what the most important procedures are in terms of what's the scope of my governance, and is it okay for me to let people do their thing within this limited area, or what's been your experience there?
Yeah, great question. Because it really ties into freedom and creativity, right? Because sometimes that's where you really discover something. So I think a fundamental thing on that is going back to having an organization, having a team, having some super users, and that your users have ability to kind of connect back with them. Because when you start thinking about this, if you need to create new data elements, something like that, there's those standards are important because they go to your readability. So they kind of have to be in there. You really need to be strict on it. And then as well, if you got databases and stuff like that, how you're going to set that up, you really need to be strict so that they can be maintained. So, really what we've seen that helps in this kind of mindset of, you got a team in a facility, they got an idea. That's really where those processes need to be in place around how do your users communicate with your governance team. Starts with getting systems set up in place to start generating requests, generating, what are some of the needs. And then when you look at how those processes work, that's where they'll start bringing in and help start defining, okay, what do we do? Does this make sense for us? And what you sometimes find, depending on the organization size, is okay, the guys that had the idea, how do you bring them into developing this in a controlled way? Meaning not everyone always has access to dev environments, but if they look to be pretty key to the idea, then you bring them on, you give them permissions to it, right? You give them a controlled environment to do this exploration and the guidance, and then you industrialize it and roll it out. So yeah, when you start talking about process and stuff like that, one fundamental thing is how do your people communicate to your governance team? That's a key one to really have in place so that you don't hinder that kind of how do we optimize? How do we get our users to really think about what's that next step?
And Laurei, I would like to add there. So, and this goes back to part of my history working for GP, which we and OSI and AVEVA all work as suppliers to Georgia Pacific. Mr. Coke, Charles Coke, talks about principles versus rules, and Coke is principle based versus rule based. And that actually works great in especially data governance. And I'm going to give an example that's outside of Coke and outside of data in general. A principle is we all have to have addresses, and we wanted to have a common system for addresses. So a common system for addresses is a zip code. Zip codes are actually generated from DC and they go throughout the country. Now, the interesting part, one zip code system, but there's not a rule other than that you have to have an address. So your address can be whatever the street number you want, whatever the road, it's decided locally, but your zip code is not. When you come to a data structure, having a principle that, okay, we're going to have a common naming structure, or we're going to have a common structure to set up multiple meals so that we can all have a two meal number. That is more of a principle than it is a rule. And what it is intended to do is to quicken the ability for others in the corporation to get to the same point that you are. And so I would say being principle-based is significant.
Thank you, Elliott. That's really helpful. And thank you, Mark, for your answer as well. So the next thing I wanted to ask about, and this is for both of you, what do you think, how would you describe the power of a governance posture, set of policies, et cetera? How does that actually accelerate a digital transformation?
Ooh, that's one of my favorite questions.
Is it?
And it is from the discipline aspect, right? So if you think about what the term or the behavior of discipline transformation, what that usually means is moving from a less efficient, less automated position to a more disciplined position, which means you start to move in a logical manner where you're using data to make decisions. Well, if you're in a single point, if you have a single motor or just a single process, it's really easy to make those decisions. But when you really get to where you have 20 or 30 of similar processes, if you don't have the ability to view them in similar terms, then you lose the opportunity to efficiently optimize across the entire set of processes. So what a disciplined governance program does or should do is it should create the discipline to make your data structure rigid so that you can count on it, to make it accessible to everyone that needs access to the data, and make systems repeatable so that in having that repeatable discipline or repeatable rigid system, I can count on the data being there. I can make decisions. I can learn either from the piece of equipment I'm sitting in front of or from all of them at the same time. And so the real force multiplier that governance possess or offers is what really allows you to become really more data driven quicker, because it gets rid of the noise or the drag in duplicating success. Mark?
Yeah, I think to to add on to that, a real disciplined governance model. I think the key to it is kind of your owner is strategic, right? And what does that start getting back into again? And how's it aligning with the transforming the organization means what are the organization's needs, and making sure that the system's going to steer to cover those needs, and not going in different directions, right? You don't have people seeking out and spending their effort solving, how are we going to do this better, right? Everyone's working together and there's purpose, and you focus on it, because that then goes back into, what Elliott was talking about is, if the use is spread across, then the value generation is definitely amplified. And so again, that discipline really comes back into, again, is people working, communicating, and really making a decision for what are we going to do with the system, right, to actually generate that value to transform how we work.
Thank you, guys. I want to follow up with a question that might seem a little off topic, but isn't. My opinion is that part of putting a governance process into place is that you need to communicate and train your end users in what that governance model is. Not only that, but how to use the tools to comply with whatever the governance structure is. What are your feelings about how difficult or easy or important it is to provide training to your end users?
Oh, I was going to let Mark start.
Yeah, sorry. I always like to kind of visualize. I was kind of jotting down a note there, right? So yeah, so really it comes back to questions around the importance on training end users. Yeah, that's definitely high when we put together our model and things that we need to do with the organization, and start looking at what are some of the tasks. And you got to start dividing it into key things of what is training for kind of the team, what is training for the users. Because the reality is a lot of users, and it could be as simple as using dashboards, right? There are a lot of the population that have a feeling they're scared to touch something, right? So, how do you do that? How do you engage with those? And that's what I found powerful is, first, what is the first thing that we want to achieve? Get in a system, look at the data, right? So that you can make some decisions. So for the different business units, you got to kind of figure out what are those core things, right? And then start putting training material together around it. But you've got to reach out to them and do either some personal ones where maybe you've got some super users that go out and sit with them, or doing some web ones. But it's really kind of putting them in that place where say, hey, click on this, try this, right? Show them that they're not going to break something. I found that that's really key, right? Is identifying, hey, what do we need our people doing? What do we really need our end users doing? Getting them comfortable touching it, and that they don't feel like they're going to break it. Because if they don't get past that boundary, they probably won't open the system unless they're asked to.
So Mark covered pretty much the whole gamut. I'm gonna go back a little bit higher and focus just on that training at that high level governance area. So training of the system administrators. If you think about that, one opportunity that I've seen during my career is where the system administrator, especially if you bring in someone new and they don't understand the governance that is in place or the why the governance is in place, can blow up your governance program. And I've seen that happen multiple times. So training, not just when you establish the program, but to have some means of continuous training throughout the implementation of the program is extremely important, because we hope that our system users, and usually what happens is super users are in on the ground level training and they will support it. It usually gets blown up because someone thinks that, oh, well, it won't hurt to change this or modify this rule. It won't hurt to give this other person the ability to make changes. And that's right up there with, oh, well, nothing should happen. And then everything blows up.
Thanks, Elliott, for that perspective. And I do want to just emphasize a little bit that mostly here we're talking about large organizations. We're not talking about a one-off plant off in the middle of Iowa. We're talking about, organizations that have multiple sites and potentially sites that have multiple lines running at any given time, right? So that's why, the impact of one person might ripple across the organization, right? So I want to make sure that we talk a little bit about sort of priorities, as it were, right? So for the both of you, if you had to say what were the 3 top items that you think are important for a fast-paced deployment across an enterprise, with the governance, of course, in mind, what would you say those top 3 things would be?
Normally I'd say jokingly a good supplier. So a good supplier could be at the top of the list for me. But no, having strong executive / C-suite support, having a very good case for change, in understanding the case for change. And then here's one that I don't know that I've ever verbalized for, but it is actually really important, and it goes to the first 2, which is having an enterprise level vision. The problem that many people run into is, whether you talk about digital transformation, driving change in general, we usually, especially when we're closer to the plant, have a very small view, or we see our horizon, but we can't see beyond the horizon. And when we're speaking to enterprise level change, if you're talking about doing a project in a mill that's going to have a maximum $20,000 support, and that's what you're basing your transformation program on, it's going to fail, because you won't see that ripple in the C-suite. So you have to have a vision that starts from a case for change, that you're looking for large changes, not just very small changes.
Yeah, I agree 100% with what Elliott's saying there, right? I can't, the vision is so impactful, right? Of making sure that's clear, because that's as a group where you're headed, and as well, how do you roll that out and change? Because that's some of the difficult parts of when you start rolling some of this out. It is going to create change. And how you tackle change management. And I mean, honestly, you're putting on that kind of psychology hat right there, and it's very interesting. There's no one formula for any organization on how people are going to take that, but what it does take is time, continuous communication, right, and alignment back to why are we doing this, right? How's it going to help you, and making sure you stick to the course. Now, you're going to find things that come up, and how do you, another element to make that fast pace is, okay, you identify some new risk. How do you manage that risk back into it? Is it really a new risk? Possibly not, but that's another key thing is, okay, as you start deploying, we identified something new, bring it back in. How do you discuss, does it impact our vision? Okay, we've got things in place that's safe to proceed, and making sure, again, the teams and the deployments, the people all understand the risk, understand you've analyzed it, and making sure we're still staying course.
Thanks, Mark. I really appreciate your talking about the risk management, right? I mean, that's really what governance is there to help with, right? That's the whole point. So one thing I want to ask you both is, especially Mark was talking about, the importance of the vision and needing to keep things going. How important is it to have somebody who's really a champion of that vision and who is a change agent?
Yeah, I'll jump in on that. For sure, the visionary. I mean, it's not everyone that can really get in some of those kind of mindsets, right? The kind of maybe off the beaten path and to really align people. A lot of us, it just depends how you work. Engineers, how are we kind of structured and stuff like that. But I like the idea, in the terms of a change agent, right? Of okay, we've got this visionary, right? But you got to get people that are close to who's really going to get impact. Those are those change agent people, right? Because again, it comes back to the psychology of it. Of are you going to pound the hammer, or are you really going to identify to the people that you're dealing with and really get into that piece of how do you persuade them? It's how do you really identify to what makes those people tick and make sure they understand that how that realigns to the vision. And that really takes, having some change agent people in place to help identify it, because it depending on how big your organization is, it can be very timeful to do, but it's very impactful.
So I am I'm a huge fan of the idea of a change agent or a change leader, and to be honest, that's usually one of the roles that I would play. And Laurei, you know that.
You know why I asked that, right?
Yeah. So here's the kicker about it. If you don't have someone that is driving the effort, then the effort is subject to the tragedy of the commons. And it's not sufficient to just have someone that's standing at the square saying, hey, I'm the mayor, or I'm running the square, if that person is unwilling to go have some conversations, challenge some status quos, challenge some thoughts that other people have to keep everyone moving in an aligned path forward. Now, that's not to say that the change agent is always right. It's not to say that his idea is the only one that matters. It's to say that between the C-suite champion who's really trying to run the business and the absolute responsibility for execution, someone else internally has to align to keep driving the effort and reporting back. And if that person is afraid to step up, you will probably fail. If that person is overly aggressive in stepping up, you're probably going to fail. So it is a very nice position that you need someone who understands change management, but that also understands where the enterprise or the business is trying to get to, and the personal relationships within that business.
Thank you, Elliott. So I'm going to do a time check with Justin. Where are we? Are we still going, or?
We're good. We can probably take one more question, and then we'll move on to audience Q&A.
Okay. Let me pick from my vast selection here. Let's see. Well, in the end, gentlemen, what we're after here is realizing some value for all of this effort that we're putting in, and whatever is involved in setting up that infrastructure to be data driven, setting up the governance processes and procedures, and sometimes those are also groups of people. How do you know that you are achieving some value from all that effort? What's the best way to measure that?
For me, and again, I'm speaking to governance on an enterprise level. Mm-hmm. It is how difficult or easy is it to duplicate solutions or to move data within the organization, right? So I will go back to, in my earliest years, I was working for IP. And while working for IP, that was at the start of rolling out of PI into paper mills. Well, guess what? I usually could not look at another mill to understand how they were using anything. If I needed to understand what they were doing, I had to go get in a car, go over. Flash forward even 10 years, where I then worked for Mead, and Mead had the ability for me to, even this would have been early 2000, for me to go from one mill to the next mill, find a similar asset and look at that asset. So for me, a governance program, if it has discipline around security, discipline around tag naming structure, and the ability for anyone to use data openly to increase the value of the business, that's where you see it creating value.
Yeah, I think to add, and I'm thinking, a little on the lower level side, more in the details of some of the heart of that governance, and how do you measure some success. And I think that really starts getting into looking at, possibly in the ticketing systems and any metrics around some of your processes. And I think that's somewhat what you find is when you get focused, right, and understand the importance of it. Okay, as users start, requesting, support or whatever, starting to measure that support time that it takes to address it. So, when your governance is really then getting mature, right, your people start to get accountable for those tickets, and you'll start to see those times reduce. I think additionally, some things that you can look at and start measuring. We'll start getting into really some of the details around on maybe how the health of your PI points and stuff like that, because now you're putting in place of hey, we need to actually take a look at our system and keep it healthy for the users. So that's another thing that you can start looking at and measuring. And I think those start, those are some of the little things that, from a real detailed level that will show health, that your model's working, your people are engaged, that are supporting the system, and that your users, right, are actually reporting back issues that you can address and really make sure it's healthy.
Thank you, guys. I'm going to turn it back over to Justin to see if we have any questions that we need answered for our audience.
Awesome. Thank you, Laurei, and thank you, Elliott and Mark. Really, really good discussion so far. So now we'll turn to the audience Q&A. We've got 2 questions so far. Again, just a friendly reminder for everyone, if you have a question for the speakers, type it in chat, and we'll get it up there. So the first question, thank you, Clevin. It's from Clevin. Would you approach governance differently in a Greenfield PI implementation versus a Brownfield implementation? Elliott, you're on mute.
Yeah, so I'll take this to start. So just to get a point of reference, so let's say if we're starting governance for a Greenfield compared to a Brownfield. For me, of course, in either situation, I would start by looking at the parent organization that green or brownfield facility is then tied to. Hopefully, there's an enterprise governance system, or at least some basic structure from an enterprise level that we could build that facility into. If not, to Mark's last point, for the brownfield mill, you would definitely, hey, excuse me one second. Hey, Justin, could you do me a favor? Could you pull up, I think it was like slide 6, the one with the circle? But there is a point in which for brownfield mill, you would want to go identify the tag health, the AF framework health, and look at those things. Thank you. So for this question, so if we have an existing enterprise level agreement or enterprise structure, this is what we were looking for. But this would be the same for a new facility if you're looking at a single facility. So in an existing facility, you have your PI tag optimization, then your integration of services. You need to do a security audit to ensure that you have the proper security in place. Overall PI system health monitoring. Is the PI system rigid, especially on the data collector levels? Your tag optimization and behavior, especially in your tag calculations. And then you get to your application. And since you guys can't see me, I'm actually following the yellow arrows right now. For a completely greenfield mill, you would actually go the other way. You would want to look at a roadmap for development of the entire PI system, PI structure, define your architecture, then you would look at your installation and configuration, your asset framework development, your tag optimization, around to security, and your integration, and then your PI tag optimization. The only difference in the two is in a brownfield mill where you have existing opportunities, you want to ensure that you solidify the existing tags, the existing structure, so that anything new that you build is built on a solid foundation. Whereas in a greenfield facility, you have a clean sheet of paper, hopefully, so you can put the structure in first and then grow from there.
Yeah, I'm trying to think really what I have to add to it. I think is more or less the same, maybe just in some different ways of saying it, right? But when you're starting with that greenfield thing, right, you're really starting with what are the needs, what are the requirements, and really leveraging best practices to actually go through and put it in place. When you're coming into that brownfield piece, that's where really it comes back in. What are the needs? What is the current state of the system, right? Really having to do that, analyzing it And then you're more or less kind of doing a gap assessment of what is the needs that we need and what are the best practices. And then you can start forming into, how do we start tackling that, right? To really get the head, get it back in check.
If I could be so bold as to add my own 2 cents.
Do it.
Yeah, the interesting thing too to consider is that if you're, going back to that idea of the digitally integrated asset, most PI systems, I would say, are only really thought about as an afterthought to operations. Once you get to operations, then it's like, oh, well, now we need to historize and collect and analyze all this data. But if you think about the digitally integrated asset from the stage of conceptual design all the way through detailed design, feed, commissioning, handover, etc., it means a lot more, and it becomes that much more valuable because you can take that data through each step through the process and not have to redo work in every step, which often happens in capital projects.
Yeah. Justin, I'm going to jump in here and say thank you for pointing that out, because as it turns out, the expanded AVEVA portfolio actually helps with that journey from the very first conception of an asset through the capital project itself and then on into operations. And so if you've got that broader view and that breadth of the AVEVA portfolio, you could actually move forward that data from that conception all the way to operation and maintenance of that asset.
So, funny enough, Laurei and Justin just answered Zach's question, but I'm going to point this out. So the last question that came in was around documentation, and Zach writes, it seems inevitable that documentation will play a key role in any governance system, but it is really hard to get right, hard to cover everything, hard not to cover too much, hard to keep updated. Any tips? If you can think of anyone that's been particularly successful with this, is there some knowledge that we could glean from their success? So Zach, the entire digitally integrated asset lifecycle that Justin has described is Radix's new product in answer to that question. And what we're working with our customers to do, and our partners like AVEVA, is we would like to start to digitize from the conception of a capital project or Greenfield project all the way through the use of real-time data, absolutely everything about that product or about that capital project, and make it available full-time, real-time, including digitizing what the visions were, what the production quality, ESG aspects were, all of the procurement systems, the procurement purchasing, where from whom, all of those things, everything around the specs of the equipment, digitize all of those things, integrate that through the digital twin, and then use the digital twin in comparison with real-time data. But in doing all of that, it should help reduce maintenance lifecycle costs. It should help reduce confusion. Being a mill guy, where we normally lose paperwork, we normally lose BOMs. So through digitizing that entire asset lifecycle, that's how we hope to address the situation you bring up.
Thank you, everybody. And thank you for the question, Clevin and Zach. Last question from the audience. We are just time check, about 5 minutes left. Thank you. So from Luis, how much time do you believe we would spend to establish a PI system governance for a greenfield project like a pulp mill? What does your experience tell you?
Mark, you want to go first?
I think you might be able to relate to it a little better than me.
So Here's the real answer there, Luis. If you're part of a larger enterprise, a few hours. If you're absolutely starting from zero, the catch is you have people like myself, like Mark, like Stephen, a lot of our members that can pull from their history, and we can cut that down. But realistically, I would tell you, depending on how many people are already engaged in the Greenfield, 3 weeks to 2 months. I mean, it's not something that's impossible, because there are a lot of people who have a lot of experience working with data. The real struggle is not the time. It is if you engage people to answer questions in an area that they have no experience with, you increase the amount of effort. What you really want to do in establishing governance is engage people that really understand what the pitfalls are and accept their answer. And you may optimize some things later, but if you accept their answers to get off the ground, the entire governance path will go really quickly.
Yeah, that's really all I can add is I think, when you work with a partner like us, we have an idea, we've done it, we've got some things in place, but it really comes into, where are you at in your maturity of understanding, systems, processes, how many people are involved, is the people involved, is this a side hat they're wearing, or are they fully dedicated to it? So, all that type of stuff factors into the time, but the strategy, the methodology, that stuff's well defined, organized. It's really just getting the input to make sure it's right for the company, for the facility where you're at, right? Making sure it's right for that.
Perfect.
Yeah,
Well,
and I'm sorry, I'm going to just add one thing to what Mark is saying, and that is that a governance strategy has got to mesh with the company's culture as well, right?
definitely. Good. We are perfect on time. So first of all, Laurei, thank you so much for joining us today and moderating the panel discussion. We really appreciate it. You are awesome as always. Mark and Elliott, of course, thank you for speaking and presenting today. And audience, thank you for being here. Hopefully it was as valuable for you as it was for us. So thank you all for being here, seriously. Couple of closing remarks. So we are going to send out an extended, I'll call it an extended slide deck. We only really went through a couple of slides, but there was a few that we actually hid. We were just going to talk about during the discussion. So we'll send one out that'll have more information. And of course, if anyone on the call wants to reach out to myself, Mark, Elliott, or Laurei, we are here for you. Just reach out to us. We'll be sure to send you our contact information, and that way you'll have it. So that's it. I thank you all for being here.
Yep. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, you guys. Always a pleasure working with you all.
All right. Have a good day, everyone.
All right.